Hello and welcome to the introduction to the Customer Order Management Infrastructure class by the Siebel Hub and Black Sheep IT Consulting. My name is Alexander Hansal and I'm very happy that you can join me for this class. In this presentation, we are going to take a quick tour across many topics, as you can see on the screen, which are all related to the technicalities of Siebel Customer Order Management. And the purpose of this course that you're about to take is to get a deep understanding of each and every of these areas mentioned here. So without further ado, let's dive right into the first part. So Customer Order Management exists in its current form since 2005, when Siebel Systems actually decided to rebuild the existing functionality that was available back then into Service-Oriented Architecture, or SOA or SOA, which was the hottest thing that was available back then in terms of modern day software architecture. Throughout the lifespan of customer order management, it had various acronyms, including COM, C-O-M, C-OM for customer order management, both of them, or you will also find artifacts named SISOM, which stands for Siebel Industry Solutions Order Management. Industry Solutions here refers to the also known as verticals applications within Siebel CRM, such as financial services for banking or automotive or telecommunications industry. And another acronym that you will find in the various areas in the repository is ISS, which does not stand for the International Space Station, but for the Interactive Selling Suite, which was the predecessor of the modern day service-oriented architecture that we see in current versions of Siebel CRM. And at the time of recording, the most current version of Siebel CRM is 22.6. So what is service-oriented architecture all about? You can read a lot about it on the internet, and here's the gist. So service-oriented architecture is a principle of designing and implementing software that provides a well-defined function, that is the service, over a common or standard communication protocol. Now that's very generic, and every implementation does it a little bit different. So in the very special implementation of Siebel Customer Order Management, the already existing building blocks of Siebel CRM that you know as a Siebel developer, such as business services or workflow processes, along with the business model of Siebel CRM, have been augmented or enhanced with other principles, such as messaging, the communication, or variable maps for the protocol, and are then combined into what is known as an application services interface. So these business services and workflow processes can be exposed as web services through SOAP and REST to external applications. So it's both internal service orientation, and the workhorse for here are Siebel business services and workflow processes that are well known to experienced Siebel developers. So business services, for example, are encapsulated, and they are basically the implementation of a well-defined business function, if they are written in that way, of course. And a workflow process is a combination of business service method invocation, so it's more akin to a business process implementation or an automation of business processes. So both actually form the service part the well-defined function part in customer order management. And then customer order management introduces new concepts, which are signals and variable maps. So we'll spend a lot of time on discussing those. For now, signals ensure the messaging or communication and the service invocation. So they are a vehicle to actually invoke a service. And variable maps define the data structure passed between the services. So they act as a form of protocol, if you will, to allow the services to act without having to know the exact data model. So it's an abstraction layer or a protocol. And also at around 2005, with the frenzy around service-oriented architecture reaching new heights, Siebel started exposing internal business services and workflow processes that deal mostly with data exchange, but also the availability of functionality through specialized business services and workflow processes that are known as application services interfaces. So the interface is specific to the Siebel application. And these interfaces allow external systems to use simple SOAP, that is the classic SOAP XML web services, or RESTful calls through the Siebel inbound REST API to communicate with the data model of Siebel, for example, to, well, load a list of products with the prices, or also call functionality, for example, such as applying a promotional pricing to a shopping cart. So all we get from here is that Siebel by itself, through its very stable architecture and customer order management as a special area of Siebel CRM, both are implementations of service-oriented architecture. Now, the one building block that we have discussed in the former slide is business services. Now, the Siebel repository provides us with literally hundreds of business services. There are well over 1,400 business services to be found in a modern Siebel repository, and many of these business services are related to the generic data exchange or enterprise application integration, or very specific functionality, for example, customer order management. You see a few names on the list here, such as the SISOM PMT service, the Rosettes Transformation Toolkit, the shopping service, the PSP waterfall service. And don't despair, we will deal with those business services in this course in due course. Also, COM is built upon the shoulders of giants, so to speak, so uses a lot of the already existing business services, for example, EAI Siebel Adapter, EAI Data Transformation Engine, or inbound email database operations. All the three examples for providing the ability to exchange data internally and externally. Along with business services, Oracle Siebel Systems started and Oracle continued to create and maintain hundreds of workflow processes that are provided to implement the main customer order management functionality and integration across all areas of this vast module, including the so-called asset-based ordering or ABO, bulk requests, compound product validation, the product configurator, eligibility and compatibility, product selection and pricing, also known as PSP, handling promotions and recommendations, and this is not even a complete list. So we will, of course, go into detail here in the upcoming chapters and discuss many of these standard workflow processes that, of course, you can amend or copy and amend to suit your organizations need. The aforementioned Product Selection and Pricing Engine, or PSP, is a very specialized implementation of Siebel workflow, implementing a generic engine based on the well-known principle of Siebel workflow processes and consisting of a controller workflow, which is invoked by, for example, a button click when you want to calculate the pricing for a quote. And this is a workflow process called the PSP driver workflow process. So this workflow process creates the common context and Rosette data using those variable maps we have already mentioned, and dispatches the data that it has collected to another workflow process, the so-called PSP procedure. So whenever you find the wording PSP procedure, just think of a workflow process that is invoked by this driver workflow process. And here we have already a basic principle of service orientation. So we have a service that you can invoke, and it invokes another service to do the specific task of, for example, finding out all the pricing information for a given quote. The invocation mechanism, or the layer that provides us with the ability to define which service is invoked when something happens on the screen or in the application, is signals. Signals were created for this newer modern version of customer order management, which already goes into its 17th year. And it's available for the COM entities. Now, when we say COM entities here, we refer to documents, if you will, that are used in the order management processes across the globe in corporations all over the world. For example, creating a quote to give pricing information to the customer, and if the customer accepts the quote, we create an order, and if the order is accepted and fulfilled, we enter an agreement. So these are three examples for very popular COM entities, and they are of course referenced and implemented as business components in Siebel CRM. And business components, as you know, probably have a class. As shown on this screenshot here, we see the classes. A query has been done on the classes list in Siebel Web Tools to identify all the classes related to order management. And if your business component has one of these COM-related classes, then it can process signals. So we have a separate chapter on signals, so not to spoil anything here. So signals are an extensions of the business component method invocation layer. So you have a administrative view where you can define, okay, this signal is invoked, for example, by a button or external system. And what happens then? For example, invoke a workflow process which invokes another service, etc. And we have mentioned variable maps as a new way in Siebel to map information from one side to the other. So think for a moment of the implications that stem from these different documents that we mentioned, quote, order, agreement. So while they are very similar in the overall appearance, a quote, for example, has a number, it has an account ID referencing the account the quote is created for, it references a price list, it has some other header information, and of course it has line items. The same with an order, it has a header and line items, or an invoice at that, but there are subtle differences between the entities, such as different field names that define the same thing, but for example, the quote has a field, I'm making this up right now, quote validation field and the order has a field order validation field. So the two different field names basically. And when you want to establish a generic context of a list of products in a certain situation, and that's the abstraction here. So the situation is a quote order agreement, and we have a list of products or line items. Then you might want to establish some kind of uniformity of the data exchanged. And that is what variable maps do. They establish that uniformity by mapping entity-specific fields to a common namespace, if you will. And following the hierarchy of these COM entities, there is three types of variable maps. The context implements the root or header instance, for example, the order or quote header with all the fields necessary for processing, such as the price list ID. Then we have the row set, and as the name suggests, this is a set of rows, and this implements the iteration or enumeration of the rows or positions, which in Siebel we are referred to as line items. So the individual products on the quote with the quantity, the net price, the discounted price, and so forth. And each product in a quote or order or agreement, if you will, can have extended attributes, which are referred to as XA. And these attributes are for each row. For example, you could define a color as an attribute for a keyboard that you sell on your web shop. So that keyboard could come in black, white, red, and blue. And the color is an extended attribute, so it's stored in a separate record associated to the line item. So variable maps allow us to map a quote order agreement or other entities into a common namespace, and that common namespace is then forwarded to the pricing or product selection pricing procedure workflow. And most of the time the data for variable maps comes from business component fields, but we can also source the data in a variable map from a business service method or the so-called current product instance, which is, for example, a product loaded in a configurator session or a product already listed as an asset for a customer. And we can also source the data from server parameters or profile attributes. So making this a very versatile concept of creating a common set, a uniform set of information that is then passed between the services. Customer order management introduces also a versioning concept for key object types. And those key object types start with, of course, product definitions, which include more or less product promotions, but they are separate object, and also signals and variable maps are examples for versioned objects. This also goes under the acronym VOD, Versioned Object Definition, that you find sometimes in Siebel CRM. So the principle here is that you can only have one active version at a time, and you have a workspace version for developing the future version, which you then release with a effective date or just release it right now. Do not confuse the workspace in this versioning with the repository workspace that we have since IP17. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. And of course, over the first part of the course, which you have probably done while sitting here, you learned a lot about versioning of products and etc. And we will use the versioning in this class for signals and variable maps, etc. A business service that we mentioned in the previous slides is the Rosettes Transformation Toolkit, and we have a separate chapter on that. So just a quick briefing on this major business service. This business service is used throughout all of the PSP procedures, the product selection pricing procedures, which is just another name for workflow process. So it's a business service used in workflow processes, but it's a very highly specialized business service that provides methods for manipulating and transforming the Rosette data, hence Set Transformation Toolkit. It transforms Rosettes. And it does so by using a specialized syntax. You can see an example on the screenshot, referencing the rows and context sets of information, and, for example, making lookups, aggregating information, implementing conditional actions, merging data, splitting data, or querying data. And the benefit of this is that it all happens in memory, so it's super fast, and unless you do a lot of lookups and queries, you can process the information available from the current product instance or the current quote instance or order in the shortest amount of time. So again, there's a separate chapter where we will deal with all the intricacies of the Rosette Transformation Toolkit. Another interesting area of customer order management in Siebel CRM is the Unified Messaging Framework, or UMF, which generates dynamic messages and displays them to users in various situations during the order process. So, for example, recommending a upsell or cross-sell of a product, which the user can accept or not. You see a retro screenshot here. It looks different now. Just for the fun of it, we added an old screenshot. And we have a separate chapter that you can use to learn all about the Unified Messaging Framework. When you calculate prices, you start with a list price, then you might have a certain promotional price, you might have a discount on the quote, you might have discounts on the line items, you might have special pricing matrices where you find out for which customers in which country, etc. You calculate which price. So pricing is a very complex process in itself, and implemented, of course, by the many workflow processes that make up the PSP engine, the product selection and pricing engine. But users might want to know why or how did we get to the end price for the product? For example, why does the customer get the product for $17.10? Why not 19, which is the list price? And the price waterfall, available as a pop-up applet, allows us to inspect the, steps towards from the start price to the end price, listing all the calculations that have been done to calculate the price. And this is an introduction presentation. And of course, we announce here that we have a separate chapter on pricing waterfall. We also will have a chapter on asset-based ordering. Asset-based ordering means, in principle, that you start with the asset being a product that the customer has purchased or is about to purchase, with, of course, the special configuration of that product. So imagine being a large corporation and equipping your traveling users, field service agents, sales agents with laptops, laptop computers. So your company would be a customer of a, hardware vendor, and there would be thousands of individual configuration of laptops because you let your employees choose the amount of memory to plug into the laptop, the type of display, the type of keyboard, could be a US English or German keyboard, and other equipment or things that are related to the laptop. So these thousands of individual configurations need to be stored somewhere, and this somewhere in Siebel CRM is an asset. An asset is an instance of a product, and if you don't have an asset yet, you need to undergo a quoting and ordering process. And once you purchase, once you pay, and the order is fulfilled, you receive the laptop, then you have an asset. So we just need to store this in the Siebel database, which we can do, of course. And then you have an asset, and let's think of configuring the asset again. So maybe adding a new block of RAM to the laptop. So you start with the asset again, you go through a quote and order process, and you modify the asset. So it begins with the asset, it ends with the asset, hence asset-based ordering. And a separate chapter will enlighten you about this principle and processing in Siebel CRM. And if you have a large customer base and they have bought a lot of assets, for example, you're a telecommunications company and you have millions of customers with different configurations of the products you offered throughout the years for mobile plans with data rates and flat rates or limited data or limited speed. And you will give those millions of customers an update so everybody gets, well, let's be generous, flat rate data at high speed. And that affects millions of customers, but you need to, of course, update those assets in your database so you know they have this service. And that, of course, update creating literally hundreds of thousands or millions of quotes and orders and fulfill those orders and thus modify the customer's assets in bulk is, well, called bulk requests. And Siebel CRM has an ability to do that as part of the asset-based ordering, and we shall explore it in a separate chapter. And when it comes to integrating Siebel CRM, the Oracle flagship CRM product is well equipped with integration endpoints from the database up to the web services. And web services includes the classic SOAP XML web services, but also the inbound or outbound REST API for Siebel CRM. Customers using Siebel IP16 and higher also have the REST API. And traditionally, Siebel is well equipped to integrate with any external system. And as we have already mentioned, we have application services interfaces, so specialized specialized business services and workflow processes that are exposed as pre-built inbound web services. But they basically have a back-end business service or workflow. And if you know that much about business services and workflows, which are just a business service invocation, then you can invoke them from any integration endpoint, of course, including the relatively modern REST API. And Oracle has not stopped there. Oracle has actually started enhancing certain areas of Siebel, making it even more robust in terms of workflow processes and business services for REST-based integration. And at the time of recording, you will find in the REST API guide several descriptions of industry REST APIs. Not mentioned on the slide is the clinical REST API, but we have a commerce REST API for telco, and that overlaps a little bit with the product administration API and the pricing administration API. So dozens of workflow processes and business services are officially documented as forming the API for REST. And of course, being business services and workflows, you can also invoke them by any other means, but the bookshelf guide gives you examples, and Oracle even provides you with the Open API or Swagger descriptions and Postman collections to get started quickly. And being the always up-to-date learning experience for Siebel CRM that we are here at the Siebel Hub and Black Sheep IT Consulting, we provide you with a brand new chapter on learning everything about integrating Siebel external systems with Siebel Customer Order Management through REST APIs. So at the end of this presentation, we have discussed, well, all of these many building blocks of the modern day customer order management infrastructure, and this should serve as an introduction to our course. So make sure you watch all the following chapters to learn more about the COM business services, workflow processes, PSP Engine, signals, variable maps, Rosettes Transformation Toolkit, UMF, Waterfall, ABO, and more. Thanks for watching. Take care and see you in the next chapter.